We're beginning this approach. It's the RNAV GPS Runway 35 at Corvallis. Currently, the airplane is established outbound from D-Ray, 352 degrees. This is a procedure turn for this procedure that we're doing, this approach. It's going to be a left turn back around, and then we'll continue the approach with the step downs to Winca Acade. If this was a holding pattern, this would be basically the parallel entry for the holding pattern. We'd go out in this 352, left turn back around, cross D-Ray, descending to 3700 to a 172 outbound with 4-mile legs per the approach plate depiction. Current altitude of the aircraft is descending through 5,500, looks like about 80 feet. We are going down to 3,700. Important things about the autopilot usage is to know what the autopilot is doing. Now, the mode control panel, if you look at the top of the radio stack there in the center, you'll see nav has an arrow, autopilot has an arrow, flight director has an arrow, and indicated airspeed has an arrow. If you look over at the Garmin G5 at the top, at the PFD, the primary flight display, you see GPS is green, autopilot is green, indicated airspeed is green, 95 knots is green. That is telling you, just like it's showing on the mode control panel, nav is the GPS function at this point, and you'll look magenta lines on the EHSI. Autopilot is in command, and indicated airspeed mode, just like the indicated airspeed mode arrow on the mode control panel, is the active pitch control at 95 knots. Altitude is armed in white. All arm modes are in white. And you see that the selected altitude is 3,700 feet. It's very, very, very important to understand that though you've selected on the mode control panel these modes, you must verify that they are either in green and active, if that's what you want, or armed and ready to switch to active at the appropriate time. It's very important. The other information that's associated with what you see up on the G5, the PFD, on the EHSI, you'll see GPS and terminal in magenta. What that is telling you is that you are flying GPS as the nav source and you're in terminal mode, which is terminal RMP. It's a more precise RMP for approaches, and that's what you should see. This is the RNAV GPS Runway 35 approach that we're flying right now. We've established the hold. We're on a procedure turn outbound where we come back in and we continue the full approach. The video depicts us currently flying outbound at this point. Capable. Final approach course is for this runway is 352. Airport elevation is 250. Touchdown zone elevation is 250. There's some notes here for uncompensated baro VNAV systems, LNAV VNAV. We don't shoot LNAV VNAV because we don't have compensated baro on this particular system, the GTN 750. Also, there's a temperature note for that. So this note does not apply to us when local altimeter setting not received. So disregard. It's just addressed that it's there. Missed approach is climb to 1,000, then a climbing right turn to 3,700, direct D-Ray and hold, and climbing the hold to 3,700. Here's D-Ray. AWAS, Cascade, Unicom Freaks. Tallest obstacles to the northwest. Says procedures not available for arrival on CBR VR DME radios 081. And that's not the case that we have to worry about today because, like I said, we're already established into the hold. We're just doing a parallel entry to turn back around. It's also another note what's not authorized for entry. Safe sector all altitudes is 5,300 feet. Right now we're at 3,700 feet. Coming back around, we're going to hit D-Ray, descend to 2,500, continue down to the final approach fix, 1,900, continue the approach using the glide slope down to a published minimum, the LPV minimum of 500 feet. And it's 250 feet above the ground. Here's the airport depiction. The approach basically comes right down the runway center line. So pretty simple. The purpose of this briefing is how to use the Garmin GFC 500 with the GTN 750 how to incorporate that autopilot fly in the approaches. All right, we begin the RNAV GPS Runway 35 outbound, established in the holding pattern, but outbound on the 352. It's a parallel entry. We're descending at this time through 5,500. The flight annunciators on the G5 are GPS in green, autopilot in green, and indicated airspeed mode of 95 knots. If you look over at the mode control panel, you have a light depicting nav, autopilot engaged, flight director, and indicated airspeed modes with the lights and the little arrows pointing to them. Okay, as this turns around, we'll talk about this approach. So we're going to hit D-ray at 3,700 feet or a little bit above. You can be at D-ray between 37 and 6,000 per the approach plate. We'll be flying a heading of we'll be flying 352 to D-ray, then we'll begin a descent to 2,500 feet. We're going to use an indicated airspeed mode for all descents in this airplane for this approach. WENKA, W-E-N-K-A, I don't know how you really pronounce that. We will continue down to 1900 to Akati, which is the final approach fix. At which time, prior to that, in the descent between WENKA and Akati, we're going to select approach on the mode control panel. What that's going to do is give a white glide path armed. When we cross Akati, it should turn green, and we will continue down with glide path to our missed approach minimums of 500 feet. Currently in the turn back around, descending through 4,500. Notice we haven't had to do much to the power to maintain this. The air's pretty stable right now on this approach. So once we have a power setting, it's just monitoring the systems. It looks like about 2,000 RPM is holding this 95 knot, 500 foot a minute comfortable rate of descent as we turn back around. Looking at the attitude indicator, the primary flight display, you'll see 3,700 is in there. It's selected for the altitude for this holding pattern. If we were flying the full holding pattern, that would be the lowest we'd go. We'd go to 3,700 and then continue right turns in the racetrack with 4-mile legs, as depicted on the plate. If you look in the bottom right corner of the 750, there's an annunciation right turn for the inbound course. Remember, any memos flashing or any alerts at the bottom right of that display of the 750 there in the center of the console, you want to make note of those. Verify what it's telling you, because there's a lot of good information there. Sometimes it's restricted airspace, another time it is addressing the approach you're flying. You must be aware of these things. So the airplane descends now. It captures at altitude of 3,700 feet. You see it just went green. And if you look on the mode control panel, altitude now has the white down arrow above it, depicting that is the captured mode. The flight path annunciator finishes flashing and it's now steady green. We now have GPS, autopilot is flying it, and altitude, all of which are in green, with an armed altitude of 3,700. Kyle now selects approach, and you'll notice that glide path is white armed. Notice on the EHSI, GPS and terminal are displayed in magenta. GPS being that is the primary navigation source, and terminal is the RMP mode in which it's flying. Terminal RMP values. All right, the airplane just crossed D-Ray. Winca is the next fix on this approach, and it's 2,500 feet on the heading of 350. Correction, 352. Now we have to get down. To do this, he dials in the next altitude, hits indicated airspeed, brings the indicated airspeed to 95 knots, adjusts the power back to 2,000 RPM, and the airplane does the rest. If you look on the primary flight display, you'll see IAS for the speed mode. And if you look over to the left, the bug is at 95 knots. Actually, it looks like it's at 100 right now. Continuing in indicated airspeed mode, there's 2,500 feet. For Winca, the airplane is descending now through 3,500. That flash you see is a 1,000-foot alert prior to any altitude changes. It doesn't. It doesn't. It's not something you can turn off. It's always going to be on. In this case, it's letting you know, hey, you're 1,000 feet above the altitude which you're going to level off. It also works for climbing. In this case, we were 3,500. It flashed. There's a horn, a sound that's made by the system, and that just alerts you, hey, you need to wake up, man. We're 1,000 feet over something you have selected for an altitude. We're a little high on this approach, but that's okay. We just crossed Winca. Kyle now dials down Alcati, which is the final approach fix of 1,900 feet. You'll see that 1,900 feet is the next altitude displayed on the primary flight display in the top right corner. Glide path is now armed, and the altitude is armed for 1,900. Notice he is in approach mode now. And with approach mode, when the glide path captures, it will turn green. Glide path is captured. The glide path turns green. Now in glide path, power is going to control your airspeed. So if you notice it starts to come back a little bit, you're going to have to add a little. If you notice it's overspeeding more than you want, 1.3 VSO for the approach, you'll need to add some. Once the glide path is captured, you'll want to reset your MCP altitude, your remote controller altitude, to your missed approach altitude. In this case, for this approach, it's 3,700 feet, and that's what was done. Continuing down the approach, all checklists should have been done by now. In fact, it's probably a good idea to do the checklist while you're outbound at Delray. And just a final GUMPS check at this point is all you need. Just a real brief 7-check, fuel, flaps, power, that's it. Now we're flying this approach a little fast just for the demo in this video. Both VORs are tuned to the ILS. They're not being used right now, but we do have something tuned in them. The bottom one is also tuned to the ILS, but it has the missed approach. The bottom VOR has the missed approach outbound radio for the missed approach procedure. So what would happen on the ILS is you would just switch the radio over and be able to use that radio as a backup to your GPS navigation that's taking you there. That's just so we have plenty of information at our disposal at all times using everything in the airplane. We were given an altimeter update from the ATC, so both altimeters were adjusted prior to landing. That should have been done well outside of the final approach fix, but it's okay. This is demo of the autopilot primarily, not the approach procedures themselves. Now, at 500 feet, what's going to happen is we're going to go missed per the plate. We're going to press toga, adding full power. The pitch bars will command 10 degrees straight ahead. Once the airplane is climbing, we're positive that it's climbing. We've got a positive rate of climb. We need to select a roll mode and a pitch mode. And for this, we're going to use a roll mode of nav because we want to fly the published mist. And we're going to select indicated airspeed and dial in 95 knots or 80 knots, depending. I think it's 80 knots for the climb. And it's going to take just a little bit of adjustments. If you do this just right, you don't even have to select indicated airspeed. You don't have to select an airspeed once you've selected indicated airspeed, because you will be at that airspeed when you press IAS due to the pitch of the airplane in the climb in toga mode, takeoff, go around mode. Kyle's getting ready to push the button. You can see his finger moving in position. There's 500, missed approach. He presses toga. Both command bars go to pitch and roll level. The airplane's climbing away safely. Nav, indicated airspeed, adjust to a climb of about 80 knots. There it is. And if you notice on the FMAs show GPS green, autopilot green, indicated airspeed green, and 95 knots with an armed altitude of 3,700 feet. So now the airplane's flying the full published missed approach. You saw that he unsuspended the suspend mode for the approach to continue, and the airplane turns.